Hi, I'm Jason Fausey, Technical Service Director, Nufarm. And today, I just wanted to visit with you on one of my favorite topics for the summer, and that is managing sedges. There are certainly a number of sedges out there, and one of those topics that seems to pop up every summer. When you first start looking at sedges, oftentimes they can look a lot like grasses. Sometimes it gets a little bit confusing to a lot of folks, but when it comes to sedges, um, the one thing that continually, if it's in a turf setting or if it's in a landscape setting, that you're going to notice is the rapid growth. One of the most distracting things that you'll find, again, in any setting with the sedge, is how rapidly it grows relative to surrounding plants. Oftentimes, they may have an off color that also is distracting, but it's often just this rapid growth that people notice the most. They'll go out and they'll have their lawn mowed, for instance, and 2, 3 days later, there's a bunch of weeds starting to stick up, and you'll get it down on your hands and knees or take a quick look at it, and you'll often find where here it has this very common triangular stemmed weed growing up through there rather quickly. When we take a look at sedges, um, some characteristics that always stand out is number one, um, the triangular stem. All sedges, regardless of which one that we'd be dealing with, and kind of regardless of the situation or setting, you'll find it has this very distinct triangular stem, and also you'll find that it has a very smooth stem. A lot of times, that's one of the distinguishing characteristics that you'll find with your sedges. The sedge family itself is one of the largest uh, out of all the weeds that we encounter. Um, there's a number of common species that we're going to find in turf or in landscape beds. Some of those include yellow and purple nutsedge, but some of these actually can be annual weeds as well. So green kyllinga, false green kyllinga, things that are certainly popping up to being more common really across the country. And we see throughout the years that a lot of our sedges have been more popular or more common to encounter, certainly in warmer settings in the southern part of the United States. But continually throughout the years, we're seeing movement of these sedges really not only into northern states, but really kind of across the country as well. So really becoming more and more common across the entire country. So how are things looking in 2022 for our sedges? I think it's been pretty common across the country to where we've had a lot of extremes in weather conditions, heavy rainfall or other areas that might be quite dry. And in sedges in general, they're really a dynamic weed to where you'll find that they really can tolerate kind of these extremes. Oftentimes, you're going to find sedges growing in really wet areas, low-lying areas that stay moist, but other times you'll find sedges that'll do very well in really dry settings as well. So what you'll find is that it's really a competitive weed. And fortunately, here at Nufarm, we have three products in Certainty, Pro Sedge, and Celero that are terrific as far as being able to help manage these sedge issues. And like I was saying, with these extremes that we've been seeing, it's really interesting in that most of our sedges are generated by tubers. So these are underground storage structures. And what we often will find is after a big rainfall, there's actually some compounds that are on the outside of those tubers that inhibit or stop the germination of those tubers from actually beginning to germinate and grow. But after you encounter a large rainfall, that you'll see that these compounds that are naturally keeping these plants from growing get washed away, and oftentimes you'll find a real flush or new um, uh, germination of our sedges right after a big rainfall. So it's a really common occurrence that happens again in the summer, especially after a big rainfall, where you'll get a lot of emergence of our sedges. When I talk to people about trying to manage sedges, it's just so different than a lot of other weeds, right? Probably the most common and one that most people are familiar with is crabgrass, where with crabgrass, Again, if it's in a lawn or a landscape setting, right, we have really strong pre-emergence herbicides. We get these pre-emergence products out, before they germinate and emerge and really become a problem. And then the other thing with crabgrass, not only can you get those pre-emergence herbicides out, but we do have some really classic materials to control any plants that do germinate or emerge through these pre-emergence applications, so post-emergence herbicides as well. But when it comes to sedges, we just don't have this 1-2 type program where we have pre-emergence, and then if you have some escapes, you can come in with a post-emergence. Really, with sedges, we're primarily just dealing with post-emergence herbicides only. So it's really not a program approach to trying to control this weed. It's really after you've had a problem, you just try to manage your way through it. I love to show this information here, some really classic work that was done both at Rutgers and in Purdue universities. These two universities kind of worked together, and one of the things that they did was they pulled out 42 different herbicides and evaluated them as both single and split applications for activity on a lot of different sedges. And what they found was really there were only a couple of these 42 herbicides that really controlled all the sedges at both of these universities. Two of which are Nufarm products in ProSedge and Celero. So again, really fortunate to have some really strong products. And it was very interesting that they noted from all this research was that products like Tenacity and several other sulfentrazone containing herbicides had activity, but ultimately just didn't have a high level of control. Tenacity is certainly an interesting herbicide, right? In that it bleaches or turns things white. And based on this picture, you would think you would have really good control of our yellow nutsedge, as white as it is in this photo. But if you came back about 4-5 weeks after this picture was taken, there actually wasn't any long-term control. So again, it's one of these weeds that really can be very difficult to manage, even when you think you may have achieved some really successful control. A lot of times it has the ability to regenerate and come back even stronger after an application. So really some conclusions when you think about sedge control, and this is really based on, again, Purdue and Rutgers University's recommendations after evaluating all these products, was that it takes multiple applications for multiple years to really help to manage a sedge problem. This is one of those weeds that likely didn't get in there in 1 year, and it's very, very difficult to have that expectation that you're going to manage it with just a single application. It does take a number of years. And also, like a lot of weeds, it's important to start early. When you start to see some emergence of sedges, to try to get on those early. Certainly in the southern part of the country, you're going to find these applications are earlier than in the north. A lot of times we'll be talking real late April and May in southern areas of the country versus it might not be until June or even July until very northern climates. But again, soon after you start to see some emergence of these sedges, it's really important to try to manage them then with a good post-emergence herbicide. And certainly the post-emergence herbicides are the most effective. I've talked about both Certainty as well as Celero and ProSedge. All three of those products can be really effective. Each have their strengths and can be used in different settings as well. And also sulfentrazone kind of was documented that it didn't have the as strong of post-emergence activity as some of the other herbicides, but still it is important to keep that herbicide in mind when it comes to a resistance management type program. Really important to try to mix that up to help manage your overall program. Just a little data here that we wanted to show on coxcomb kyllinga. So this is, again, one of our kyllinga species that we can really find growing pretty commonly in turf. And what we're looking at here is that the taller the bar, the better the control. And you can see that products like Celero and even Celero in combination with Dismiss certainly had some activity when you look at it at 17 days after the application. But in this particular case, we see that the blue bar here, the Certainty, provided the strongest level of activity. So again, it's nice because, again, we have some really strong products in Celero and ProSedge and Certainty, and really depending on which species that we're looking at, we can kind of tailor the specific herbicide. And we know that some of these Kalingas, that Certainty is a great choice for attacking and kind of really going after certain Kalinga species. Now, false green Kalinga is a common sort of mat forming Kalinga species that we've been seeing move from the north or into the north from some of the southern areas of the country. Celero has been really strong on this particular species. And we can see here at 56 days after treatment, that large green bar there, that's Celero by itself. Again, providing well over 90% control versus some of the other products in this particular trial, not providing quite the level of control. The one thing I would like to point out, though, is the yellow bar here is our Celero with quincept. So a post-emergence crabgrass material in quincept tank mixed with Celero. And you can see actually the control level drops relative to the green bar, the Celero by itself. So this is why oftentimes I've recommended to people, if you're really targeting some of these sedges, you have to be careful with what you're mixing with various herbicides. Celero is a very translocated herbicide, right? Its strength is that it has the ability to move both, especially down to the roots, and have really strong post-emergence activity of these sedges. But when you mix it with another translocated herbicide, in this case quincept, you can see where you have the ability to actually kind of fight one another with these herbicides, to where actually the level of control can dip. So again, I think if you're targeting some of these sedges, it's always nice to apply some of these translocated herbicides like a Celero or a Pro Sedge or Certainty by themselves. So really, in summary, with the sedges, two key points that I always like to visit with people about. And number one, again, understanding that not all plants germinate at once. I've talked about it. You get a lot of times a big rain, you'll see a new flush of germination. So it's important that you make early applications, but then, like number two happens to mention here, count on needing 2 applications per year, and even for several years. Again, these nutlets can stay viable in the soil for well over 5 years. So if you've had a population or have some issues with sedges in a lawn or a landscape, again, this can potentially last for several years. So you need a good, strong program, and you need some patience to really attack it and expect to do that over a couple of years until it's completely been able to eliminate the population. Within turfgrass, again, start early. That's when I tend to talk to people a little bit more about potentially using sulfentrazone with those early applications, because it does have some root uptake. So it can help, even though the control might not be completely perfect, right? We can still, again, kind of attack or start to knock that population down, and then have a good, strong follow-up application with a product like Celero or Pro Sedge later in the year. And then for landscape applications, keep in mind that non-selective herbicides like a glyphosate or glufosinate, that overall they're pretty darn weak on our sedges. At best, they sort of maintain that population flat. That's even with multiple applications. So really try to start with a program approach. So maybe a fall or really late winter application of a herbicide such as Goal or Broadstar or SureGuard in these landscape beds can really start to build the foundation. Also, a spring pre-emergence application of something like Pennant or Tower that has activity on sedges. And then again, kind of coming back if there happens to be some plants that escapes those first applications, that you spot spray them then with a post-emergence product like Certainty. Works really well in landscape beds. You can get close to plants. Again, you're not applying it directly to the ornamentals, but if you have some sedge growing in there, you can make a nice spot spray with Certainty. So again, some differences between our turf and landscapes as far as the ability to apply various herbicides. But again, the key here is multiple applications and really trying to get these particular weeds before they become such an issue.